The king has returned. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about Disney's 2019 photorealistic live-action remake, The Lion King. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All of my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. The Lion King stars the vocal talents of James Earl Jones, Donald Glover, Beyonce, and many more, and was directed by Jon Favreau in his second outing as a live-action remake director for Disney, following 2016's The Jungle Book. The Lion King follows the same story as its 1994 counterpart, focusing on the lion cub Simba, who's next in line to become king of the Pride Lands. Following a tragic event, he runs away from home, and it takes the guidance of some old and new friends to convince him to return in order to protect his kingdom. If you saw my review of the original animated Lion King, you know just how important that movie is to me. The Lion King is my absolute favorite animated movie, and it's been a huge part of my life. The Lion King was everything to me when I was a kid. The movies, toys, games, stuffed animals, Halloween costumes, birthday parties, wallpaper. The Lion King was also the first movie I ever saw in the theater, and so 25 years later, I drove all the way home to New York just so I could go see The Lion King in theaters with my dad again. Before I can really get into this review, we've got to address the tempo in the room. This is another Disney live-action remake. Well, sorta. And as such, it's gonna be divisive. Kinda silly really, but it's the circumstances we're living in. Despite being very popular with general audiences, these live-action remakes have garnered a sizable number of haters, people who are just adamantly against the existence of any of these remakes. Since The Lion King is such a universally beloved Disney film, it's understandable that people would be concerned with a remake, and so that group of anti-remake people has grown even larger for this particular film. And that's fine. People can choose to see or not see whatever movies they want. But it seems like the biggest issue or question these people have is why? Why remake a movie that's already perfectly good? It seems like the common, or at least squeaky wheel consensus is that these live-action remakes are unnecessary. Now, we could broaden that and ask what remake is necessary, but that's probably a whole discussion in and of itself. So, if you boil it all down, there are really only two paths that any remake can take. The first is that of a true remake, repeating something that's been done before and sticking as close as possible to that original source material. Same story, same characters, no real surprises. The second path that a remake can take is that of a reimagining. The source material becomes more of an inspirational guide than a set of blueprints. Maybe the story's changed, or something fundamental about a character's altered. But no matter which of those two paths is taken for a remake, somebody's always going to be disappointed. Path 1, true remake? Why bother? The original's perfectly good. Path 2, reimagining? Why did they change that? They ruined it. Now, obviously, each path is gonna have its fans too, but this is where that divisiveness comes into play again. With these live-action remakes, Disney's tried both paths and have been criticized and praised equally for them, so there's never gonna be a way for one of these remakes to ever fully win. Personally, I went into this movie with an open mind and would have been okay with either path. True remake? Awesome! I get to see a story I already love told again on the big screen with an amazing photorealistic visual makeover. Reimagining? Cool! I get to see a story I already love told in a new way. In either case, my love for the original 1994 film wouldn't be changed in any way, and that Blu-ray would still be sitting unaltered on my shelf when I got home. As it turns out, the 2019 Lion King follows the first path. It's a true remake and sticks very closely to the original. I've seen a lot of headlines dismissively calling it a shot-for-shot remake. Given the astonishing photorealistic animation, I don't see how anybody could be unhappy, even if that were really the case, but I think it's actually really disingenuous and reductive to just wave this film off as a shot-for-shot remake. It has its moments of that type of shot-for-shot mimicry, especially during The Circle of Life, but that's a far cry from claiming that the entirety of the movie offers nothing different from the original. All the big story beats remain, of course, but some scenes and moments were omitted, some were added, and plenty were altered. I mean, you certainly can't claim that a scene like I Just Can't Wait to Be King is shot for shot here. As with any remake, it's hard not to compare this film to the animated original. Impossible, actually. I know I'm certainly going to make plenty of comparisons during this review, but when you see the movie, just make sure you don't get too bogged down by it. It's really easy to get so caught up in the comparison game that you forget to stay in the moment while watching this film. It's also important to keep in mind that nobody thought this remake would be better than the original. Not me, not you, not Jon Favreau. It never could be, nor did it ever intend to be. It's simply a remake, a retelling of a story we already love with a slightly different look. So as hard as it may be, I recommend that you take Timon and Pumbaa's advice when going to this movie. Put your behind in your past. Since the visual look is the biggest change from the original film, it seems like as good a place as any to start. It's absolutely astonishing. The animation is truly photorealistic throughout, to the point where if these characters didn't talk, this movie could probably be confused with a Disney nature documentary. It's that good. I love the animation in the original. In fact, I spent a good chunk of my review of that movie talking about it, but I also love the animation in this one. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. They're both fantastic, just very different from one another. The original film turned animation into something breathtakingly cinematic, and this remake has turned it into something real. The photorealism is insane. The wind blowing through Mufasa's mane, the flick of an ear, the step of a paw in deep sand. It's a truly remarkable achievement in animation. Reality was clearly the goal here, or at least as close to reality as is possible in a movie about talking animals. Colors are accurate. It may make the film look a little less vibrant than the original, and it may make it a bit tough to tell young Simba and Nala apart, but this is what lions look like. This is the actual color of a warthog, of a meerkat, of a hornbill. Similarly, the movements of the animals in this remake are much closer to the movements of their real-life counterparts than to their animated inspirations. The way Rafiki walks and the way he positions his body during Simba's presentation are far more natural than in the original film. Perhaps less dramatic, but that's a trade-off for the realism. And this brings us to another trade-off regarding the animation: emotion. In the original film, all the characters had extremely expressive features. They had big eyes and faces that could easily express human emotions. Their body movements conveyed emotions as well, and they were capable of doing things like hugging and crying. Real lions can't do those things, and since this film was going for realism, the lions in this film can't do those things either. So that's inherently going to make it more difficult to get human emotion across during the movie. One film can show Simba sobbing with tears streaming down his face, and the other can only show him with a slightly startled look of confusion. It can make the characters seem emotionless and difficult to connect with, but that's the trade-off for realism. The technology certainly exists to give this version of Simba big, expressive eyes and tear ducts, but the decision was made not to. Again, the fact that this has been called a live-action remake is a testament to the filmmakers' intentions. They wanted it to seem as real as possible. All of the major story points remain, but like I said before, quite a bit has been changed. Some of these changes I liked, and some I didn't. I really liked what they did with the I Just Can't Wait to Be King sequence. I also liked the addition of some moments that were never explored in the original, like Simba's journey to the jungle and Nala's decision to go find help. The devastation in the Pride Lands is also more explicitly explained this time around. Of course, I loved the new scene involving Rafiki and an old friend of his. There were even some things from the original film that I think were done better here. Pumbaa's "When I Was a Young Warthog" flashback, how Rafiki finds out that Simba's still alive, and the Lion Sleeps Tonight sequence, including its transition into the next scene. But for as many changes as I liked, there were just as many that I didn't like so much. There was a baffling amount of dialogue that was changed. It didn't alter the story, and some of the really big iconic lines were still there, but some weren't. Maybe it's more noticeable for me because I've seen the original so many times that I could probably recite the majority of the movie from memory, but there were just so many great lines they took out or tweaked just a little bit for no real reason. For example, in the original film, Rafiki brings Simba to the water to see his father, and in that scene, Rafiki touches the water and says, "Look harder." In the remake, same situation, Rafiki says, "Look closer." Why? I mean, it's super minor and inconsequential, but why? That kind of thing happens so many times. Similarly, certain scenes were changed up quite a bit for seemingly no reason. The elephant graveyard was probably the most disappointing example of that for me. Be Prepared was also a little disappointing. Now, I understand why that had to be changed a little bit, but it didn't have nearly the impact that the original version had. By far the most disappointing change, however, was the complete omission of Rafiki's "the past can hurt" lesson. I would argue that that scene was integral to the plot, so its removal here is completely confounding to me. Talking about all of this change means we have to talk about the humor. Despite some very serious themes, the original film had a lot of humor. Timon and Pumbaa are probably the first that come to mind, but the hyena trio, Rafiki, Zazu, and even Scar were all quite funny as well. In this remake, that humor is toned way down. Zazu has some funny quips, and there's a little humor from some of the hyenas, but it's nowhere close to what it was in the original film. Here, Shenzi lives up to her name's meaning. She's savage, and that's it. Zero humor whatsoever from her. Almost the same goes for Rafiki. There were definitely a few instances of situational physical comedy that got some laughs, but they weren't jokes. He never sings. He's a much more restrained Rafiki. And as far as Scar goes, there's very little, if any, humor. He's played as menacing and threatening. And so that leaves us with the comedic core of the original film, Timon and Pumbaa. You know, of all the casting choices for this remake, Billy Eichner and Seth Rogen were the ones I was the most skeptical of. But I've gotta say, they were kinda perfect for their roles. I don't really find Billy Eichner very funny, but I loved him as Timon. And even though I like Seth Rogen, I was concerned that his voice was going to be too familiar, and that it would really stand out too much. But when I was watching, I just heard Pumbaa. The comedic interplay between Timon and Pumbaa was fantastic, as it is in the original, and there were a lot of new funny lines that really modernized some of the humor. The original film had a little bit of self-awareness with Timon and Pumbaa breaking the fourth wall, but I think they took some inspiration from The Lion King 1.5 and really upped the self-aware meta humor here. There's some really funny stuff during the Hakuna Matata sequence, and they were just really entertaining overall. So, as a huge, nearly lifelong fan of the original Lion King, what do I think of this remake? I think it's great. I really enjoyed it. Is it as good as the original? Of course not, but that was never the intention, and I certainly didn't go into this movie expecting that. I didn't go in expecting to hate it, but I didn't expect to necessarily love it either. I wanted to love it, and it turns out I actually do, but there are tons of movies I go into wanting to like that I don't actually end up liking. You could blame my liking this movie on my love of the original film, but I think that love is actually a double-edged sword. There are aspects of this remake that I love, because I also love their equivalents in the original movie. But those little hints of that I feel about this movie are only there because I'm comparing it to the original movie in my head. Again, it's impossible not to compare a remake to its original, but I truly think this movie is far better than people are going to give it credit for. Yes, it's a remake of an already amazing movie, but it's pretty amazing in itself, too. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number 1 is the photorealistic animation. It's absolutely mind-blowing. Everything about this film looks real. The animals, the settings, the backgrounds, fur, rain, water, fire, the way the animals move. Everything looks real. Like I said before, if it wasn't for the talking animals, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody confused this movie for a nature documentary. It is truly astonishing. Don't get me wrong though, I still think the animation of the original film is amazing too. They're very different styles and relied upon very different technology, so you can't really say one is better than the other. They're both fantastic and very cinematic. And you know what? It's okay to like the look of both the films. It doesn't have to be a mutually exclusive kind of thing. My second pro is Timon and Pumbaa. I always enjoyed them in the original film, but they were never my favorite characters. I wouldn't go as far as to say they were my favorites here either, but I thought they were really entertaining. The fourth wall breaks, the meta humor, the bantering, it was all great. There were some scene alterations and additions that I thoroughly enjoyed. Things like Baby Pumbaa and Timon's "I don't know where you're getting circle" were fantastic. The voice casting for these two was spot on, and easily my biggest surprise when it came to the voices. Pro number 3 is the inclusion of previously unseen story interludes. None of these things fundamentally change the story in any way, but they certainly provided a little more context and information to moments that get kinda glossed over in the original film. Things like Simba's journey to the jungle. In the original, we watch Simba run off towards the horizon, and the next time we see him, Timon and Pumbaa are bowling for buzzards. It works well, it flows in the original movie, but it doesn't give you much of a sense of how long he was out there and exactly what he went through during that missing time period. In the remake, we get a little bit of that. Same thing with Nala's decision to find help. In the original, she's just there. But in this one, we see her advocacy for finding help, and then we see her taking it upon herself to be the one to find that help, despite the danger it puts her in. Pro number 4 is a super obvious one, but it's The Lion King. Yes, it's a remake and didn't create a new story, but the story that it has is fantastic. The characters are great, the themes are important. All the core things that made the original film so great are still here, so how could they not be considered a positive aspect of this film too? As far as cons go, the biggest issue this film has is its dampened emotions. It's all a consequence of the decision to strive for as realistic looking animation as possible, so it was intentional, but it definitely doesn't feel as emotionally impactful as the original movie. A cartoon animal has a much easier time expressing human emotion than a real or photorealistically animated animal does. I appreciate the decision to go for realism, but I do miss the range of emotions the characters were capable of showing in the original film. My second con is the removal and alteration of iconic lines and moments. If this film had taken that second path of a reimagining and utilized very little of the original film script, this wouldn't have bothered me as much, but it took the true remake path instead. So many scenes and lines from the original were used, which made the decisions to cut out or alter others seem really arbitrary and unnecessary. A lot of it kind of felt like minor change just so they could claim the dialogue was different. I'm sure some people liked that, but I would have preferred it if they had just used the iconic lines. Most of these changes have no significant effect on the story or characters, but the removal of Rafiki's post-cloud lesson scene with Simba seems like a pretty big misstep, given its importance to both the plot and character development. I'm gonna give The Lion King 4 out of 5 paws. It really is a great movie. It never reaches the emotional heights of the original film, and most scenes don't have quite the same resonating impact, but just because it's not as good as my favorite animated movie of all time doesn't mean it's not still a wonderful movie in its own right. I would recommend The Lion King to almost anybody. I recommended the original film to literally everybody, so the only people I would remove from that here are those who hate the live-action remakes. Fans of Lion King should love this movie. As long as you don't go in expecting this to be better than the original or exceptionally different, there's no reason why you shouldn't like it. It's the same story you already love with a few minor tweaks and a photorealistic makeover. If that sounds unnecessary or offensive to you in some way, then a remake just isn't for you. If you liked The Lion King, I obviously have to recommend the original 1994 animated version. Chances are good you've already seen it, but if not, you'll love the emotional and thematic impact that the wonderful hand-drawn animation was able to bring to the same basic story. I would also definitely recommend the 2 animated sequels, The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, and The Lion King 1.5. The The Lion King 2 expands on some of the key themes found in the original film and this remake, while 1.5 utilizes a self-aware meta approach to Timon and Pumbaa's comedy, much like we see in this remake. If you want to branch out some from The Lion King, but love the photorealistic animation here, be sure to check out Jon Favreau's live-action remake of The Jungle Book. Although it features a human character, all of the backgrounds and animal characters were animated in a photorealistic way similar to this film. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen The Lion King? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, when seeing a remake of a movie you love, do you prefer a true remake or a reimagining? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button, and if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.